going to unmute our hosts and turn it over to them. Or if y'all want to unmute yourself, y'all have a lot of people here to hear you and I can't seem to find you.
I'm unmuted. Anthony?
There we go. Good morning, everyone. And that was a great introduction. Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody taking the time to join us on the Zoom today. I thought when the Ward Museum reached out to see if we'd want to participate, contribute to the weekend, I felt that would be cool to do that because I enjoy judging at the shows, because I like talking to a lot of carvers because judges helped me over the years. And I just want to try to give back to some novice intermediate carvers, some beginners. There's tons of questions out there, when you're starting to carve, especially when you carve alone, you can't carve in groups. That was my situation. I didn't have anybody in town to really, meet up with and carve. So going to the shows really helped me learn. Although it was long periods in between when I went to shows to be able to talk to people. And luckily, I met a couple of people, some great carvers that were willing to help me out, over the phone. And so I was able to slowly progress over the years. I wish I would have started a lot sooner in life than maybe I would have been more advanced than I am now. But I still have a lot more to learn. And that's why I like talking to people, because you never know when you can pick up any kind of tip or technique from somebody that you may like on their decoy and want to incorporate onto your work. So, I've been, enjoying the decoy carving forum when it first started years ago. And I mean, that was one of the greatest opportunities to talk to people across the country. I mean, I met people across the country, carvers that I, became really good friends with. And I didn't meet them in person until I went to the World Show and knew people for 15 years without even meeting them in person. So that was great. So I think the carving community, I mean, there's so many great people involved and you meet so many great friends and so many people that are willing to share. So especially Tom. So I appreciate, him jumping on and sharing his great knowledge with us today.
Just to echo Anthony, I agree. I appreciate everybody's jumping on this morning. A couple things. I probably do 4 or 5 Zooms a day, and I like seeing everybody on. A couple things. One, if you have a question, please raise your hand or type it in the chat box so that Revelian can interrupt us and get that question answered. It just makes the flow of this seminar roundtable type discussion go a little bit easier. And part of what we're going to do is Anthony and I are going to go back and forth. We're going to talk about some areas that we have an agenda. And if you have anything that you'd like to see covered, or we get on a topic, type it in the chat box. Go to the bottom of the screen on the rollover toolbar, and you'll be able to type it there so that we can remember it moving forward. So with that being said, just an overall flavor of what we're going to do. It's going to be a discussion between a decorative carver and a gunner carver. I gave up burning and texturing a long time ago. It's not my bag. I just don't do it. I like making gunners. And under every good decorative, there's a better gunner. Is how I see it. So that's where we're going to go, and that's what we're going to start with. So I'm going to turn it back over to Anthony, and we'll get rolling here.
All right, so we'll probably jump around a little bit. We kind of have a little bit of a try to get a flow going, but how things kind of go back and forth on certain topics you think about right when you're talking about it, and you may branch off to something else. But at the very beginning, like for me, I still have a lot more to learn, in my opinion. I started with decoratives. That's what I saw at the shows, and I love waterfowl, so I want to carve a decorative. But I struggled a lot. I still do, with anatomy, because you try to do things, and you only have so much wood to take off. You take too much off, and then especially when you burn and texture, you don't want to use wood fill. So making mistakes, takes a long time to carve something and not make a mistake. have to try to fix something. So that's what I try to avoid because I burn and texture my pieces. But the first thing I want to talk about is, so I jumped back into doing more gunning birds to help me improve on my anatomy. And also I've had people request, some decoys to hunt over from me, which is great. I've hunted over some of my own decoys, kind of going back to the tradition of hunting over your own rig. And I find that so rewarding. Carving something, throwing it out in the marsh, and watching birds come in and land into your spread, and it's great. So I'm kind of getting more into the tradition, the heritage of carving decoys to hunt over, as well as doing decoratives, because it's helping me with my decoratives. But I try to carve something the way I see it out in the marsh. I do have an aviary in my yard, so I can study some birds and kind of get their characteristics and really see how they act on the water and their head positions and just the body, the shapes and everything. You really get to learn a lot when you have an aviary. But what helps me out a lot too are study skins. And since I hunt, I'm able to get study skins of my own. I'm able to harvest my birds, and I can skin them out after I've taken all the meat out for duck sausage or sticks. I always, a really good specimen I can skin out. So I have study skins too for reference. But the most important part of the decoy to me, and I've been told that from the beginning, is the head, carving that head to make it look like that species you're carving. So the head position, the accuracy of that head. What else do I want to incorporate in that decoy? What do I see out there in the marsh? I always look for color, that makes that bird pop, because a lot of decoys that you carve may go on somebody's shelf, may not even be used. So you want to have some kind of interest on that bird of, flowing of that decoy, great lines, make that eye travel throughout the decoy, which I've been taught by numerous judges have, told me a lot of things I'm trying to pass on to some carvers. Peter Palumbo is a great person to talk to get a critique on, because he really dives in deep, not only with color, but with flow, with lines, the bird's attitude and all of that. So when I'm carving a decoy, that head is the most important part. The head, the front area, because that's where your eye goes. You see that bird, right? That's what you look at. And then also you want to have that look when it's out in the marsh. So you're carving a rig of teal, a rig of canvasback. You want to have that silhouette that looks like those birds, because I've been told, Tom, is it correct that you can paint birds basically all brown and it'll attract ducks? I mean, they, as long as it has the shape. And
I think that's a valid point. Early in the morning, the first hour of gunning, you want to see that silhouette, and after that, sun comes up, and then a brown bird could still work. One other thing, Anthony, on that bird, hold that bird up and show a little closer. Is that a cork bird that you got?
Yes, it is.
So for those on the call, you'll notice Anthony has the head joint. How'd you attach that head?
Well, this particular, I learned a great method years ago by a carver named Tom Matus. I went to a seminar up in Antioch, and it was one of the best seminars I went to, because I picked up a few things. I still have the notes from there that I, sometimes revert to. So on my particular birds, on my decoratives, I try to do a full piece. I don't like to have a head joint, since I burn in texture. If you don't burn in texture and rely on some fillers and paint, it's okay to have a separate head. But when you go to burn and everything, it's really difficult to hide that seam. And later on, I'm gonna show you a little method that I learned from a great carver, Leonard Russo, world champion, who taught me a great method for doing decoratives on a two-piece, where you can not have to use wood fill. Anyway, so getting back to this, normally I try to get a flat, the flattest plane as you can, on that seam on both sides. I still use a screw to attach mine, because I feel if I'm doing a gunning bird, any type of a gunning decoy, whether it be made out of cedar, cork, I do a lot of cork birds, because what I like to do, it only takes me maybe 20 minutes to shape up a cork bird. And it helps me learn the anatomy very quickly, because I can just sit there and I can move very fast with a drone. And if you do take too much cork off, you can put some fill in it, some Bondo. And what I like to do with my cork birds too, I like to put a little, sometimes you get a little, a lot of areas where there's a lot of divots and everything. And so I'll just kind of put a little fill in there, just have a little bit of smoother finish. So back to attaching the head, what I like to do is I always try to line up the head to where I'm going to be, I put a screw. Because I feel that guy's going to pick up that bird, by the head all the time. He's going to throw it out by the head. So over the years, it may wear and tear. So just having that screw in there, to me, gives me confidence that head's going to stay on. I always drill, maybe three or four holes on each side. I epoxy it, and then I attach the head. And I attach the head with a screw from the bottom and bring it down. And it gives me that nice, clean, seam and a real tight finish. But using that epoxy, 5-minute epoxy, it by drilling in the head and also into the cork or to the wood, it gives that maybe a fake, like a epoxy screw, and it just, it's on there solid. So, I mean, that's pretty much what I do as far as attaching the head on gunners. I'll go back to the decoratives a little bit later on.
And to expand on Anthony's, like this buffle head I have here, on this buffle head, I actually mortise and tenon this because I believe that's exactly what happens. The head is a handle for any gunner. So I have shifted from what I did earlier with screws. I just shifted to 3/8 and 1/2 inch dowels. Now, just how I started to do it, and I believe if it's a true gunner, form, match, function, and use, what I do is if something ever happened or broke and I get shot out, I could cut that head off, drill the dowel out. So there's a couple ways of doing it. Not one way is the only perfect way. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up how Anthony was doing it. So this one here is mortise and tenon, and it's a big square head, and I can actually get a real nice seam sanded without glue down in the joint. So this is an oil bird done in cedar with the rasp marks left on it. Just a real simple, clean bird to hunt over, one of the Chesapeake Bay dippers. Now, on a cedar bird, if I was to, start to rasp that bird down, before I actually attach the head, I'll rough it down and round it. You can see I round the bird with a rasp or a sure form. And then on this side, you'll see I start to cut the side pocket in. In one of my books, this is one of the birds from my book. It shows you, and I just kept it around. I was 15 years old. There's the beginning of the eye. There's the other side of the eye. And then when you open it up, you can see how I hollowed the inside. But you can also see right there where I attached the screw that goes up into the head. Now, here's another option. You screw it in, you screw and glue it. You pull the screw out, and then you drill into it up into the head on an angle, and then insert, so that you have a nice seating surface here at the neck body shelf. Okay, so it can be on an angle, it can be cattywampus, it can be whatever you want. Glue it on first, take the screw back out, and then drill it and dowel it. Just another option for attaching a head. So just thought we'd bring that part up. Hey, Anthony, how do you?
I tell people not to don't shoot at my birds. They'll say,
yeah. Yeah, and then some of the people
wait till they.
Some of the people I hunt with that I have an issue with. So, and I take those guys because I make them sign an agreement that if they shoot one of my birds, they have to buy it. So it all comes out in the wash.
There you go.
Right. So Anthony, once you did that, explain after you attach the head and you start to get the bird smoothed out, and you said it takes you about 20 minutes to rough a bird and cork. How do you lay out the feathers? What's that next step?
Well, pretty much, since I'm a decorative carver, I get really picky, even with my gunning birds. I try to make them as realistic as I can. Because, a lot of times I'll do donations, and I'll do them out of cork because I can get them done fast. And I do a lot of fine detail painting on gunners, the ones that I'm not going to compete with. So basically, on my layout, I get if you can hunt, it's very beneficial to save your own reference. Whether it be wings, whether it be the skin, heads, profiles. When you go out, every time I go out hunting, I find a nice specimen. I'll get a nice profile of that bird. I'll take measurements, so I get the exact profile that I want of that bird, and I'll get different profiles. What I'll do is I'll comb the head, feathers up to get a little bit more of like the head's being puffed up, just to get that shape of that head. So I'll get my eye measurements, off the real bird, from the culmen to the center of the eye, so I have that exact measurement. I take field notes of all different measurements. I'll also get I'll take the wings off, and that's a good starting point for when you're carving something, to have your reference. And if you don't hunt, maybe you can try to find somebody that hunts, and you can get reference from somebody that harvests birds, and you can use those for reference. Also, if you're really into it, you can buy pen raised birds and send them off to taxidermists, and you can have them mounted, because you can get measurements from your mounts as well. Measurements, I wouldn't copy mounts, and we can touch on that a little bit later on, Tom. It's always, it's been talked about. So, I basically get my layout, I'll have my measurements from my pattern that I make of my tail to my tertials, where that tertial starts, to where the scaps start, to where my cape is, and where the beginning of the cape, the front of the bird. So I pretty much have those solid measurements of where those major groups are, where my side pockets are. I'll I'll lay out on my pattern where the side pockets go. So then I'll just use pretty much a level or I'll put my bird on a table, my block of wood, and I'll have my I don't have it up here with me, but basically just a square, and I'll put it on the back end, and I'll go from that back end, mark out where my tertials are, the scaps, and the cape, and then I'll fill everything in.
Why do you go from the tail?
What's that?
Why do you go from the tail?
It's just because I have that reference point of my tail, and I know where that tertial's going to be at, and so I go tertial because I know the tertial so far back. I'm going to have my scaps, where my primaries start, on a straightforward decoy. But then I can also lay my my feathers, my study skins on my bird and get my reference that way. If I'm going to have the wing turned out a little bit, I'll know the angle of where my tertials are going to be, because your tertials always follow your primary, on your
right.
So that's pretty, and I'll have my basic layout, where that's going to be. Usually,
come closer to the camera.
So I pretty much have, my layout. You see how that works?
Yeah.
So you can also make these, your own, because Pat Godden has reference wings. There's a lot of pattern books out there that have, wings in there where you can basically cut them out yourself and have those for reference. So that's pretty much where I get my starting points on mine.
Gotcha.
I mean,
you
can go from the front of the bird to the back. I mean, you want to have your marks where your cape starts, where your scaps are going to be, where your tertials, and so you get your basic layout.
So the reason I brought that up, for some people on the call, it's imperative, because that breast can move, change, shift, and rotate left or right. It really has to be from the tail. I asked Anthony that for a specific reason. Back in the 80s, I talked to a carver, and he pointed out to me, when I showed him my bird, I said, "Hey, what do you think of my bird?" And he's like, "Man, your painting's good, but your anatomy sucks." And I was pretty much crushed. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to do it. So I went to as many seminars and classes as I could. And quite honestly, once I learned to measure from the tail forward, because the mechanics of the wings and feather placements and feather tracks can shift longitudinally off of the bird, but to go back and forth on a standard bird, they're set. So you would measure your primaries, your upper tail coverts, your ophel gland, then you go to your tertials, and one of the layout things that I was taught is they're like your fingers, right? So how many tertials are on? What's the main purpose of a tertial? Tertials are 5 of them, and they cover the area between the bird's body and the wing. So when you lay them out, you put your hand on the bird. This is the longest, and then this one is shorter, and then this is the 3rd longest. So when you lay them out, pintail, widgeon, black duck, mallard, canvasback, the tertials are all. Start to look at any of the books. Start to look at those wings. Listen, I have more wings laying around here than I have knives. And if you don't have this, it's like, hey, I'm going to carve a basketball, and you have no basketballs around. And all you have is footballs. You start looking at footballs, and you're like, man, your basketballs start turning out like footballs. So the reason I asked Anthony that is to convey to everybody here on the call, those wings and the placement of the feathers is extremely important, and it's mechanical. It's absolutely mechanical on how those feathers are laid out.
Sometimes I'll skin a bird, I'll keep both wings attached, because you have to really get into the breast to be able to cut the shoulder area of the wing, where you can take that out. You can still have because all your scaps are all attached. I mean, if you know the when you pluck them, they're all attached in one area. They just spread out. Same with your side pocket feathers. The side pocket feathers are all attached down here, and they curl back up. That's why we can try to get into, like, when we judge, Tom, some things that we've seen on some of the beginners, novice carvers, with things that they're doing on their birds. You're just carving a block, something out of that block of wood that looks like a duck, and you're going to hunt over it. I mean, it's not, when you get to eyes and feather placement, you just want feel of those gunning birds. We're kind of talking about, if you're going to go and, maybe compete with some gunning style decoys, if you're going to make some contemporary style decoys where feather measurements are more important, feather groups. And then, of course, when you get into decoratives. But so I like to, I've been, I still have the cape attached. So I pretty much have, I don't want to think it was like it's pretty gruesome, or like, I have a freezer full of specimens, and my wife, at the beginning, she goes, I thought that freezer was to store chicken and meat and everything. I open up and duck falls out all the time. What's going on here? So I try to get as much reference as I can, but anyway, I've taken, reference like this. So I have everything attached, and I know where those measurements are going to be. So that's really helpful too, not only just taking the wing off, but if you can skin the back of that bird, you can get, basically your cape on there, your scap groups, and your wings all in one. But talking about, like when we're judging, Tom, some things that we see, and that's a lot of areas of mistake where I see on beginners of the feather layout. A lot of times, that tertial, if you can get something that, sketch out the wing from one of the pattern books, you can times, you're told, I've been told over the years, where my tertials, they were broken. I mean, if that wing was correct, it would, if it was correct, that wing is going into that shoulder, that part of that bird. So you always draw that imaginary line that comes down and goes into that side, that side pocket area there, because that the wing, that shoulder sits right into that side pocket. So, those are the areas where a lot of beginners make mistakes, is that angle of that primary, especially, if they get a little bit more anatomical features on that bird, where making it turn and making sure that primary is correct. And also those tertials. So I see a lot of mistakes where the angle of the tertials won't follow the angle of the primary. And they're always going to follow that primary because they're attached to that section of that wing. Whereas your scaps, are going to, will stay in, straight off the bird there. So that's a lot of areas where I see a lot of mistakes is feather layout. Where that side pocket starts, where that speculum, is being showed on the bird. Sometimes, a lot of times, Tom, I've seen a lot of, speculums way in the very far back of that bird. Whereas they come out, probably at the top of that side pocket. So that's a mistake area where you can run into. And also, so feather layout's really, really key. Also, and you can get into that more, Tom. Also, your droopy bill, the droopy bill and the eye placement, that's huge. And I want to talk about that, getting that correct, because that's the most important part of that bird is that eye placement and not having that droopy bill. I've seen so many, birds with droopy bills.
I got to get a bird. I'm pulling one off my wall here.
That's one thing I want to talk about is that eye placement on the bird, is it correct, from the distance from the comb. Some I see, and puddle ducks are different than divers. Puddle ducks sit a little bit higher. The divers, are more in line with that Coleman.
Hey, Anthony. So everybody, what Anthony's talking about here too is I have a mallard wing here, and one of the things talk about, and we've discussed at times, it doesn't come out of the back of the side pocket over here. The speculum is actually like in the middle, right? And I'm actually a little far back on this bird. See how I'm missing it?
We all kind of do that, and I think it's for visual purposes, just to see that speculum.
Well, whether it's visual purposes or not, decorative or gunner, right. And so what I do is I lay my this wing right on the bird when I'm painting or carving to get that correct, that angle of this wing. And one of my biggest heartburns that I see with a new carver, they're trying to do something that just doesn't mechanically work. And let's take a look at this wing. We talk about feather placement and stuff, but the shape of this wing, it actually comes out from the humerus and the alula, not the alula, humerus. I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Comes out here to the wrist, and this is the last spot where there's a bone, and it comes out. It's out, and it's almost square right here, and then it droops down, and that correlates to where the secondaries are. So if you're going to do a decorative or a gunner, this type of material is vital. It's extremely vital. So we're going to shift. We're talking about feathers. We're talking about I've got golden eyes feathers. I've got what an actual feather looks like, and I take that feather and I lay it right on the bird, and I take a look at the feather. Obviously, this is a wood duck, but I lay it on there and I take a measurement and take a look at how it would fit on the side pocket.
Right.
And as Anthony states, I have literally hundreds of pages of paint schemes. These are just the side pocket feathers of a gadwall. So I took each and every one of the feathers out. And man, if you want to beat someone like Tom Christie or somebody, you gotta up your game, man. And it ain't easy. You guys they get good. You keep looking at what you're making. There's another feather out of the side pocket. I have feathers coming out the yin yang over here. But that's the only way you can get better, is to have, here I literally have books after books in my shelves right there, full of feathers to look at, because if you don't have the reference, you can't duplicate it. So and I'm going to talk a little bit about bills before we get going away from feathers too much. I also have hen feathers, and they're vital. right? Everybody wants to do a hen feather. And I lay these out, and you can see how one feather on top of the next feather, you can do translucent. This is poorly done, but you can see how the feathers darken when they start to layer on top of each other. If you have this feather, you do the same thing I did with the other one. You lay it on there, you lay it right on the side pocket, and sketch it on. If you can't do it, right, there's a really good example of how I would lay that feather onto the side pocket if I was doing a hen mallard.
And they curve. I mean, even though they're attached on the bottom, those side pocket feathers curl up. They have a curl to them, and they curl up, so it looks like they're pretty much coming out, straight on that bird. I mean,
so yeah, and that's one of the things. The feather track. I'm going to try to draw this feather track, and you'll see guys do this. The feather track is connected like this, if you can see that. And basically, this part of the feather is connected right to that feather track. And they're when you skin them, when you pull them apart and you pluck feathers and you start to look at them, you're going to go, oh, that's why that feather shape is like that. And then the water pushes them up, right? But that's the important. That feather is really, really round. And what the bird does, tweaks its skin, and it just twists the feather out, and it slides its wing in. There's a lot of great video on YouTube, Facebook. Start to watch birds preen. Everybody's got a Canon or a Nikon. Really start to pay attention to what birds are actually doing. And I, Anthony's on one side, I'm on the other. Anthony's doing decorative. I want to make sure that the form and function and simple pose. I don't want to go putting a bunch of detail on a bird and it's not right. So I think that's a real good contrast. He's doing decoratives. He does gunners too, but I do gunners more. I try to get them more anatomically correct. And I really think more people should stick with a couple species and figure out what a bird looks like. Right. Anthony, over to you.
Well, I was just going to say, that going back to track, I'm constantly drawing on my bird, those feather track lines, because you're carving, you're sanding, especially when you're at the beginning carving stage, you're constantly just drawing on that wood. And I like to use number one lead, because when you're using Tupelo, because it doesn't dig into when you get to the final detail of your laying down your feathers. Number one, even though it breaks, it's very soft. It doesn't press into the wood as much, because you get a real nice soft piece of Tupelo. Using the number two pen, maybe a little bit hard, and you may tend to press a little bit too hard on that. Everybody else, does the same thing, but I always constantly draw my feather tracks, while I'm carving, and have that visual before I actually lay the feather pattern down. Sometimes I'll have some really great feather tracks on there, and then I'll carve some more and sand, and I'll lose it. I go, I can never get back to it. And so I'm always like getting tracing paper. If I have a really good feather track down, I'll get that clear veneer tracing paper, and I'll lay it on there, and I'll pretty much get my pattern on that, if I find something really good. Because you always, doing decoratives, you always want to have your feather flow. You want to have that eye be able to trace part here. You want to do something with color, with something with angles, to make your eye travel from this point and go back this way onto that bird. How are you going to get your eye travel? Is it going to be a speculum color? Is it going to be a feather shape, moving at a certain angle? Subliminal view of a, feather pointing this way, a good, way I use, on your primary there to get that eye to go from this point all the way down to this point, and it follows it down the rest of the bird. Learned that from, Pete Palumbo taught me that. And I always think about that when I'm laying out my feather track, is how I'm going to be pulling that eye of that viewer from this part of that bird all the way down to this part. maybe 3-4 parts. It can be done with, your feather tracking, with the shape of the feather. Maybe there's some pointed feathers, going this way. I mean, that does a lot of stuff to the eye, just like colors, shapes and things like that. So I'm always thinking about that when I'm carving any style of bird, just because I'm a decorative carver first. I always put my decorative thoughts into a gunning decoy, which I shouldn't, because it takes me too long to carve a gunning decoy. Unlike Tom can get one out in a couple of hours. It takes me maybe a couple of weeks just to do a gunning decoy. But anyway, back to what we're talking about. Always those feather tracks, color, make that eye go this part of that bird all the way down to this part. How you're going to do that, and you have to be thinking about that throughout the carving and throughout the painting as well. Because okay, I'm going to be painting this part. I'm going to have that black, line on those tertial feathers, and on this bird, and I'm going to have them pointing up this way, so that eye will travel. Just that little bit of color on that's going to make that eye, go that way. Some a little bit of lighter in that center of those primaries. It's going to push that eye that way. So feather tracking is very important. Let's hit on some how to prevent the droopy bill, Tom. Because I see that a lot.
Yep. Before you go over there, I showed everybody a pencil. You were talking about pencils. You may not have seen this pencil. It's a SketchUp pencil. It's small. It fits right in your hand, and it has a big, huge lead in it. It's soft. If you look in the notes, it's $7-8, and you come with 50 leads. But the leads are basically 5 millimeter. And the reason I say that is it works really well on cork, and it doesn't on anything. So when you're doing your cutting and roughing out just to get stuff done, I reach for this pencil. It's a bonus. And while Anthony was talking, I wanted to show people about there's two ways of doing things. You can set the head in with this golden eye, but that's where you get this type of an issue. I learned this one from Keith Mueller. You can mortise the back of it so you have a nice clean cut, and then you just screw it in and dowel those so that you don't see them. So that's just another option. I do this for my students so they can see a different way to skin that cat. So
I thought that was from a study reference that you shot that double-headed golden eye up on the snake.
Yeah. This is and by the way, this is my spare cork. I glued it together. I'm making stuff all the time, creating. I have a wild hair, and just grab a piece of spare wood and go for it. So, is there any? We're at 40. Any questions? Anybody want to type something in the chat? Unmute before we get into the bills. Anybody have any questions off the top of their head? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Back over to you, Tony. We're gonna continue talking about bills.
Okay, so on when I'm judging novice, intermediate carvers, I see a lot of mistakes, with that, like I mentioned earlier, that head. That's the most important part of that decoy. Getting that look of that species, capture that essence of that species. You always hear all the time, because you want to make sure you're carving that cinnamon teal to make it look like a cinnamon teal. Like I said earlier, I try to trace as much as I can. I try to draw. I mean, you can use all the great pattern books out there. I still use them as reference, just to double check my proportion, my shapes and everything on my own patterns, and go back to those. And like I said, I try to mark my measurements from my reference that I bring home from the birds that I harvest. Getting that center of that eye, where it comes from off the bill. And so I always have that measurement. Of course, everybody, that carves, if they're gonna do something accurate, they have, study bills are great. And if you don't have study bills, I've met some carvers that, don't use study bills, that just carve, working decoys. That's fine. But study bills for me help me, get that angle of that bill correct, where it meets up with the eye. So that's real important to me to have study bills. And I have, different brands of study bills, because there's some great study bills out there. There's some that aren't so great as far as the way they made them, because the bill shrinks, of course, after the bird is killed, and so they don't get a really good mold. And there's some bills out there that aren't really good, but there's like Van Dyke's, McKenzie Taxidermy. They have some pretty good study bills in there that I use. They also have some good study bills with the eyes on them. What I'll do is I'll try to, it's very hard to take your measurement of your eye, from a study bill, because that's not really the center of that eye right there, of course, because that eye has, builds up and comes out, and it's at an angle. So if I have that measurement down, then I can basically try to build up my eye on that study bill and find out where that edge of that eye is and the angle. Another thing too, on some of these glass eyes, I pretty much use the Mohican eyes, but they have that on that bill, they have, on the eye, they have a lot of glass at the end of it. And when you're getting the width of your, where you get that width of the eyes, on a duck's, when you look at a duck or a bird, that color is almost like at the edge of that eye. You don't see anything clear. And so some of these study bills, they have that clear glass on it, and you don't see the color for maybe about 16th or maybe, some of these Mohican, there's a lot of glass. So I try to take the measurement of where I see that color, when I get my distance, when I set the eye. I haven't set the eyes on this one yet, but when I set the eye, I'm going to make sure I do it to the color of that eye on some of these eyes that have a lot of glass at the end of it. Because if you do from the edge to edge, it's going to change the shape of that head, right, Tom? If you have too much, if your eyes are not set, if you set them too far in, you're going to start getting a pinch look. And I think that's where there's some mistakes being made, is people are not setting their eyes correctly as far as the width.
I agree, Anthony. I think one of the biggest issues with carving ahead is to look at live birds or reference. What I did for myself is I have a very similar study bill as Anthony does. I took this bill. Here's the detail side of the. Excuse me. This is the side I want to do as a gunner. And I just take a look at this in the overall size. What I did was I added AV Sculpey to it, and you can look down it and see the difference of the actual skeletal structure and the bone. And I added my own texturing to it to make it look like the real thing. So as I'm gonna actually mold these so that, and you can make it yourself, but this is something that I think, just looking at that eye and how you set the eye and put that little bottom eye ring with the nictitating membrane area on it, it really helps people get an idea of, well, this is a study bill, but that's what it really looks like and how flat it is. Anthony has a good point too. When coming up with these registration marks and doing the upper culmen area and the width here at the top of the bill where it meets the forehead, you need to make sure that from the eye to the bill tip to the rictus notch and setting your basal line, all of those things are extremely important. And it's just not one measurement. So when I cut a head out, I really have to make sure that this here is at the end of the bill is within a half of my pattern. Because if I go to use a pair of dividers, okay, and I like to have dividers. Sometimes I'm not really worried about the actual measure. I can just go, and this is back into my Navy days, I'll just take it off the pattern. But if this is wrong and the bill's too long, it'll push the bill out onto the cutoff, onto the cutout. So the registration marks, the eye, are very, very important, critical. And if you shift the eye, it shifts this distance from the
Right.
upper the upper culmen to the front of the eye. All right.
Yeah.
And then if that shifts, yeah. So,
and so that's what let's hit on setting those eyes real quick, because we have so much to talk about. Can we go 2 hours? No, really.
you guys mind? I can talk, and Anthony won't let me talk.
Yeah. Well, we got to,
I'm just kidding.
Keep with the program here.
I know.
I'm kidding you. So, but I mean, just areas that, I'm trying to hit on some, areas that I see mistakes on with some things that I judge, from carvers, the beginners, novice, intermediate, in that bill, that droopy bill. It could be the head angle that's making that bill droop. But getting that, I don't like to pre-drill my eyes. I run into issues a lot because the wood moves around on you, if you don't do it on that, that block of wood. So my decoratives, what I like to do, is on my decoratives, I always carve the eye in. I learned that from Dell, from years ago. He told me he used to carve the eyes in, and I started doing that, and it really helped me out. Because I can carve, I had some pictures, but I don't know if we can be, it's too late to bring pictures up. I always like to carve the eye. And so once I get my bill done, well, first of all, to prevent that droopy bill, Tom, I always cut my pattern. I always cut on my pattern. So I'm pretty close to where that head shape is already on my block. And then carve the bottom, so I don't start. I don't keep carving down like this. I try to cut the bottom of that wood out, so I know I can't go below that, so I don't end up with a droopy bill, because you can end up with a droopy bill with where your eyes are placed too. If you put the eyes wrong, you try to follow the study bill that you have, and it makes that drill the bill droop. So I don't particularly like to pre-drill the eye holes unless I'm doing some gunners. I'll pre-drill the eye hole. But for decoratives, I always like to carve the eye in, because then I can carve, and you can practice on cutouts. I mean, like Tom says, he's got extra cork. I save so much wood for my cutouts, so I can go back and I can use them for practice paint boards. I have scraps of wood where I can practice my my burning on. So I always save everything that it's hard to throw Tupelo away because it's so expensive. But I always like to do practice burning on scraps of wood, because I'm always fooling around with my burning pin, and that's something for decorative carvers. If you're a decorative carver, some things I wanted to hit on really quick before this ends. For burning, if you're burning your bird, if you're going to go through the gruesome trials and tribulations of burning, I'm with you, and I applaud.
I'm not. Nope.
So because there's two trees. I always say there's two carving trees. Just like coaching trees. There's a Brunet tree and there's a Godin tree, and you just fall off those those branches there. And I'm more towards the as far as the gunning birds. I try to use Pat Godin's painting style, Tom Chrissy's Tom Matus' style, Brunet style, all my decoratives. But for burning, very quickly, I'll go. I want to hit on that before we end here. But that's pretty much, I try to carve my eyes in. That way, I can carve the rest of the head, and I get the shape of my head down, and not take too much wood off here, and not take too much wood off, and not have a pinch look. So I pretty much try to carve my my eyes in, on my bird, and then I can drill them out, and try not, as far as decoratives go, I try that not to drill out too much wood, and that way I can try to slip that eye in without taking too much of that wood out, so I don't have to put a whole lot of wood fill around there. So I like to carve my eyes in on mainly most of the decoratives. Some gunning decoys, if I do a fancy gunning contemporary style decoy, I'll do the same thing. For once I if I'm doing a gunner or something like this, then I'll go ahead and drill them out so I can get those eyes placed. But I'll carve so I can get that roundness to this point, till I know where that edge of that eye is going to be. Go ahead, Tom. You can hit on that too, because that droopy bill, the eye placing, making sure that eye isn't too, I see a lot of mistakes where the eye is placed too low, on puddle ducks, they have to be higher. They're pretty much in line with that Coleman. Divers are so that's a lot of mistakes there, or they're set too far back. So those are the areas that a lot of improvement needs to be done on beginner's novice, is that eye, the droopy bill and that shape of that head, not getting that shape down to look like that species.
And I think, Anthony, from Gunnar, so for the people listening, you can go with a series of levels. You can have a lot of detail on that eye. You can have medium level with a little bit of an eye, but then you have none. And somebody asked, I think it's Tom Christie, I started using, I've always used Apox Sculpey. It's available through any of the carvers, Amazon. It's actually it's used for taxidermy work, and it's like sticky and moist for about 30 minutes, and in an hour or two, it's basically easy to work with. After 2 or 3 hours, it starts to set up and you can form some detail. And then in 24 hours, it's hard cured, waterproof. And I fill stuff with these cracks and holes, or, in behind the heads and stuff. I can drill and tap it. So I've had very good luck and success just using that. And it smooths with water. And this whole side of the head was done with that. I filled into the bottom, and it's just how I make things. So it looks like we're at 8:55, Anthony. We've covered a lot of material for our attendees. Does anybody have any questions, comments they'd like to ask?
Yeah.
This is Rick Pass. Do both of you, Anthony and Tom, do both of you offer Zoom classes? And then I wanted to ask, the second question was, when you're setting the eye on a study bill, and you want to make it look like a bill with epoxy sculpt, you set it right at the front of that, I don't know, the skeleton on the eye.
Are you talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
That seating surface, Rick, basically is where it should be, and the angle is set. I would put just a small amount of epoxy behind it, and it's something that I do. I learned it from Keith Mueller. I've kind of refined my own way to do it. I kind of fill the eye socket when I drill it, and I put a small P in there, and you can kind of manipulate and articulate where the eye should be. Eyes are like 11 degrees and 15. They're not flush, and you can tell that by looking at this angle that the taxidermy set. It's set just like that. And here's the deal. If I look down the bill and I'm looking at that bird and it doesn't see me down the tip of the bill, when you're looking down that bill, guess what? It's these attention to detail. So and as a judge, and Anthony started to talk about this, I could pull up a number of photos. I've got good friends that send pictures back and forth. Hey, did you see this? Did you see that? Check this out. I'm looking straight down. Some of these guys, Ray Hennessy, there's some great photographers out there, Dominique Martin. I can go down a whole list, Sobolewski. There's just a whole list of guys that take these low-level shots, and you can see them. That's what's in my mind. And if I don't see it in the carving, I start to just, if a carver doesn't nail those details, then there's going to be something else they miss. And then it starts to go from the bill to the eye, to the head, to the neck, to the placement, the posture, the feather tracks, the primaries, the secondaries, the tail. And that's how I judge my own bird. If I'm looking at that bird and the eyes aren't level, it doesn't leave the shop. I pull the eyes out and set them correctly. So.
And I like to use a surface gauge, so when I set my eyes, I have a surface, I don't have it here, but I have a surface gauge. I have, and I'll put it on the table, and I'll bring it up, and I'll get the exact level of those pupils. and making sure they're looking at me. I remember it was funny. I had a judge tell me one time when I had some gunning birds, "Oh, your eyes are a little off." And I go, "Well, they're not. I know they're not off." He goes, "Yeah, they look a little crooked to me." I said, "No, they're not." I go, "But what does it matter? It's a gunning decoy. The ducks aren't going to be able to see the crossed eyes from, even if they were crossed." He's going, "Oh, that's right. They're judged from, a distance." Real quick, but that's real important. That those eyes, the bill, not getting a droopy bill. Focus on that. And if it's wrong, cut it off and start again, because it's never going to change. It's always going to look like that. And it doesn't hurt to put another head on there. Real quick, for the decorative carvers out there, I wanted to hit on this because I mentioned earlier. What I like to do if you're doing a two-piece decorative, if you have to have a surface that's very flat on each end. I like to you cut all the inside out, maybe about an eighth on each end, and then at the end you can maybe do it 1/32 or an eighth at the end. Wet it. You have a screw coming up from the bottom, a lag bolt, and you get that, and you cinch down that lag bolt. It pulls down, and it marries those two ends together, that tupelo. And if it's wet, make sure you have to get it wet enough, and it just smashes it, and you pull it down as you just tighten that thing, and it just starts smashing and going into it. And you have two pieces of tupelo that just marry each other. You can't use this tupelo. This is like rock tupelo that I carved a bird out of. I had to use a chisel, when I was doing all my detail work. But anyway, it's got to be a soft piece of tupelo, and you can marry those two pieces, and you have a seam that is so tight, and you don't see it. It works with gunning decoys too, where I don't have to use a lot of fill. Back to your question too, Rick. Anytime you want to hit me up, I'll be more than happy to do some Zooms with you if I have the time. If you have an area that you want to improve on, that you're struggling with, shoot me an email. I'll Zoom with you, since I know how to do this now. But I'll be more than happy to help anybody if they have an issue, want to learn a technique, improve on something, ask me some questions. I'm always willing to learn from anybody, because there's a lot of stuff I still need to learn. But if I can help somebody that's or get to that next step, I'm more than happy to help anybody out. So shoot me an email. It's lonegoosedecoys@att.net. I think I have it on my Lone Goose Decoys page. You can shoot me an email, or my Facebook, message me on Facebook. We can set something up. I'll be more than happy to help anybody out. If you need some wings or something like that, hit me up before the hunting season. I can drop them in the mail to you as well. Because wings are a big help, right, Tom?
Yeah. And Rick, I also have TM Decoy over on Facebook. I have done a mallard carving head. I'll be doing a canvasback head. And I wanted to attack the newer carvers to get a real good baseline on understanding the registration marks on the head. So I did the mallard head, and then I did I'm going to be doing a canvasback head that second Saturday in May. So I'll be posting that up on the Decoy Carving Forum, as well as my TM Decoy page. I see Ray really on ready to cut us off. I think we're dead. I know.
No, I did not. I did not.
Yeah, there's so many, great videos out there by so many carvers on their own Facebook pages. Vic Herkman, I was watching some videos. He was doing some texturing and burning the other night. I was watching some videos he had. There are some excellent carvers out there, contributing on the Decoy Carving Forum, on their own Facebook pages. And I appreciate that, because I watch them all. I try to learn anything I can. So hats off to everybody out there trying to help other carvers out.
I want to thank very much Anthony and Tom for joining us this morning. I will say that I was in charge of putting together tomorrow's video programming, and Anthony gives us a tour of his aviary, and you got to stay till the ending. That's all I'm going to say.
Are you gonna leave that on there?
Oh, we did, yeah.
Okay, good.
I am putting in chat the next Zoom, which actually started at 11, that's ergonomics with Dr. Aaron Buffardi. At 1 o'clock, we have a start and finish with Larry Bart. And at 1 o'clock this afternoon, we have critiques with Del Herbert and Josh Googie. So again, I want to thank Tom and Anthony for joining us this morning. We had a lot of participation, a lot of great information. And we are still live on our Facebook page where we have judging going on our back lawn. And just many thanks. I look forward to meeting all of you next year where we can do this in person.
Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you.
And by the way, make sure you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And make sure you tell the Ward Foundation how informative it was, and drop them a thank you for setting this up. It was great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
And next time, let's do 3 hours next time, because we got a lot of information.
All right, bye.
Thanks.